Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today, we are going to be going over team previews for every team in the AFC South. If you haven't seen, we've already done previews for every team in the NFC and AFC North and the NFC and AFC West. After these two with the AFC South and the NFC South, we'll be moving on to the West. So, to get it going right away, we'll just kind of put our narrative out there for each team, kind of discuss their offseason and why we feel like this narrative kind of rings true for the team going forward this year in 2024. To start it off with the Houston Texans, our narrative is, does the offseason that the Texans had make them a real Super Bowl contender?
So I feel like, and you let me know here, Hunter, but I think it's pretty clear to at least us, the way we've been talking about it. I think it's safe to say that the Texans have officially moved themselves into Super Bowl contender range. Now, again, obviously, there's kind of two camps to it. They're either in the camp that, all right, look, the Texans made a huge jump last year. CJ Stroud showed amazing flashes, but we got to slow up. We've seen years before where QBs come in and have an amazing season, or even just when they've already had a developed career, have an anomaly of a season where they can never replicate it again. We got to pump the brakes. We haven't seen more than 1 year. And then there's the camp we're in, where it's like, all right, when a young guy is showing flashes like that CJ was showing, making those throws outside the numbers, making those clutch plays with a pretty young, inexperienced receiving core, and you add Stephon Diggs, you add all these pieces that they added this offseason, and, people come to it, Hunter, where they say, I don't know how I feel about the draft class. I don't know, maybe the draft class, not a lot of people, I shouldn't say, but it's kind of the same thing where some people don't really feel it. Some people are seeing that it's more of a long-term vision in the draft class, which is how I view it. And again, that's just kind of the reality at this point. Like, I understand why people are a little bit hesitant to say that the Texans are Super Bowl contenders. But the way I look at it, look, the league develops quickly. Things change quickly. The Texans went from being a team I had no expectations, you had no expectations for, to next year we're talking about them as Super Bowl contenders. But that's just how the league moves sometimes, and the Texans are the most recent example of that.
Well, Dobbs, I'm willing to say, like, even if they didn't do their full additions that they did this offseason with, through the draft and through free agency, I would already say they're Super Bowl contenders because we've seen how far elite quarterback play can get you. And in my opinion, if Stroud is just like a little bit better than he was last year, like, that's Super Bowl contending quarterback play. Like, the way Stroud played as a rookie was very impressive. Not to mention that DeMeco Ryans did a incredible job with the team. They go out and they add Danielle Hunter, and then they go add Stephon Diggs, whether that's on a 1-year deal, whether he stays for longer. And now you have Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz. Like, that is a great receiving core. You go out and trade for Joe Mixon. Like, this offense can be one of the best offenses in the league, and the line is pretty decent too. So when you get a defensive-minded head coach that added weapons on defense, when you have a very, very, very promising up-and-coming quarterback who played at arguably an elite level last year, and add a number one receiver like Stephon Diggs, I don't understand how you can't consider them Super Bowl contenders. I'm willing to argue even if they didn't add Diggs, they would still be Super Bowl contenders because that defense and what CJ Stroud could do and what he was doing with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Noah Brown, Robert Woods, like, they worked with less and accomplished way more than anyone thought they could. So I think saying the Houston Texans aren't Super Bowl contenders is selling them extremely short. Is it a harder path because they're in the AFC? Yes. You can make the argument that the Texans could compete for the 1 seed in the North, or not the North, the AFC, I'm getting it all mixed up, the NFC right now with the 49ers. I mean, I'd be willing to place that bet where it's like they could go toe-to-toe with one of those teams, one of the top 2 teams in the NFC.
No, absolutely. And I think, you already kind of touched on it. But a big thing to me that stands out a lot when we look at the Texans depth chart now is, and again, this is kind of across the board. This isn't just, really at one position, right? We talk a lot about how having depth is such an important part of being a championship team, right? Well, we look at depth just across the board here, right? I mean, look, yes, has he been the same guy that he was at first? No. But Dameon Pierce, backup. Robert Woods, Noah Brown, John Mechie, whom we haven't even really gotten to see shine because of the early diagnosis that he got over. God willing, all that, right? And that's awesome. He's back. We haven't even gotten to see John Mechie back and is doing really anything yet. So we don't even really know what John Mechie has in the tank. So we got a backup crew: John Mechie, Noah Brown, Robert Woods on as a receiving core. I mean, that's basically the Ravens starting receiving core over there in Baltimore. No shots taken, but call it how it is. I mean, that's a really talented group of backups, and we could go across the board. I mean, look, pick and choose wherever you want. They have Derek Barnett as a backup edge, Mario Edwards Jr., backup D tackle. We got Deshaun Phillips, C.J. Henderson backup, Kalen Bullock, who was their third round pick this year, if I'm not mistaken, already right as a backup. I mean, Jeff Okudah as a backup. They have names and they have depth in backup positions where they're not even needing to be out there unless their name is called due to an injury or whatever else. I mean, the Texans pretty much at this point epitomize having depth across the roster in the best way possible. So I think, to me, that's the biggest thing that stands out when we talk about them being a championship team is like, look, they're not just a team. We've already gushed for weeks now about how this team went and got the starters in place. Now, it's not only the starters. They have a whole bench unit that's ready to come in and play good football too. So this Texans team has done everything you have to do to put yourself in position to go win the Lombardi Trophy, as far as I see it.
Well, I'd also say, like, when you talk about depth, you can look at their cornerback room and, like, Derek Stingley Jr., yes, you like their safety room. They had Kamari Lassiter, who was their second-round pick. But, I think you mentioned it, like, Jeff Okudah, C.J. Henderson, like, Desmond King. They signed all these guys, and, it's almost like none of them are, like, for sure going to be good. And I'm not talking about, like, Derek Stingley or hopefully Kamari Lassiter not to be good, but the other guys that they signed, like a Jeff Okudah, it's more like, okay, we need safety depth. Let's take guys that had a lot of talent coming out and hope that they can play these positions where they're not guarding the number one receiver. You know what I'm saying? So I think that was a smart approach there, and I think overall the Texans could arguably say they had the best offseason out of any team in the league. I mean, I'm willing to say that they're at least top three. At least top three. I mean, I would say close to one, in my opinion, but I don't know how you look at this team and say that they aren't, like, Super Bowl contenders.
No, yeah. And in terms of who's made, like, the biggest leap over the last two seasons, it isn't really particularly close. The Texans have gone from, like, bottom feeder to true Super Bowl contender. So if anybody's laid out the blueprint of how to do it, GMs, go back and take a look at the Texans last 2 years. And is taking the shot on the QB and getting it right, which is more of a shot in the dark than anything, a huge part of it. Absolutely. Yeah. But, the vision has been laid out here. So you know what? The Texans, they showed us how it's done.
And it's really crazy. If they would have took Bryce, I don't think they'd be even close to the same position. And I think the Panthers are kind of sick about that right now. But
I don't. I do think that he would be in a much better situation, but I don't. Look, the reality is you can't call anybody making that developmental jump how CJ made the first year. Just the maturity it takes. It's tough to do.
Moving into the Indianapolis Colts, who finished with a 9-8 record last year. They barely missed the playoffs. I think the main narrative for this year, Dobbs, is we get to see if Anthony Richardson is the real deal. They went out and got Adonai Mitchell. They got a pass rusher who's going to be playing a lot more snaps now that we saw Samson Ebukam go down, which is going to be good for the rookie. I think Leatu Latu, as long as he can stay healthy, is in a good spot. Anthony Richardson, he has helped. Their O-line should take another step forward. They have Adonai Mitchell. They have Michael Pittman. They have Josh Downs, who kind of stepped up last year. Jonathan Taylor in the backfield as well. So the offense is a well-oiled machine, and you have one of the best play callers in the league in Shane Steichen. The defense should be good as well. And I think what they did last year with Gardner Minshew was pretty impressive. And now, God forbid Anthony Richardson goes down, they have Joe Flacco, who is able to kind of step in and do what he hopefully, kind of did for the Browns. And, our narrative is mainly, is Anthony Richardson the real deal? And that, I think, depends a lot on his health. Can Anthony Richardson stay healthy? Because another thing that we'll talk about really quickly, and I'm going to open it up to you here, is this team almost made the playoffs last year. They were basically in a playoff game with the Texans and lost, right? And we saw what the Texans did in the playoffs. It was really cool to see what a young team can do. My thing is, you were playing with a more established, I don't want to say established because of his time in the league, quarterback in Gardner Minshew. I think the talent and what Anthony Richardson can be obviously is higher than what Minshew is, but I feel like we have to temper our expectations this year a little bit for the Colts. While the roster is really good, you have a really good coach, you're basically throwing a rookie quarterback out there who struggled with a shoulder injury last year. So I think the Colts can make the playoffs, but it's not the end of the world to me if they just miss it. As long as they almost finish with the same record or maybe one game less, I feel like the Colts are still in the right direction.
No, absolutely. And, to your point, Hunter, what I really want to touch on about this whole situation that makes it so interesting in Indianapolis, right, is because, right, everything you already touched on. So the coaching staff is for sure in place. The roster, for the most part, really at this point is really starting to come together. Like, you have a top 3 O-line in the league. You already pointed out all the offensive personnel. Yes, the defense is not the greatest defense in the entire world. However, they're an established unit that's young and rising, right? So they're getting better. They have a good group of young guys that are getting better each year, which is what you want, right? Like, all in all, it's a pretty young group with a lot of upside. Right. But the bottom line is Anthony Richardson kind of fell into a very unique, kind of odd situation here. And I don't want to make the comparison, so I won't. But I'll let you fill in the blank if you can fill in the blank yourself here as the audience, right? But you tell me, there's another situation that happened recently, right, where a quarterback with all the athletic upside went to a situation where all that they had to do was figure it out very quickly, and they would be that team's starter long term. However, the team turned around quicker than perhaps the physical specimen was able to mature into being an NFL quarterback. Now, I'm not saying that that's what I think is going to happen with the Colts, and that's not what I want to happen. You know me, and you have been a Richie truthers here since the beginning. But, like you're saying, I think the problem is with all these other quarterbacks coming in that are big, athletic, but they're not developed yet in terms of quarterbacking, which is what Anthony Richardson was coming in. Everybody else is very quick to pump the brakes on those guys. But for whatever reason, as the NFL populace, a lot of people were all in on Anthony Richardson, being an amazing quarterback from day one. And as you and me think, I think he showed more flashes than I expected his rookie year. From a quarterbacking standpoint, Anthony Richardson truly did, or I can't say, you get what I'm saying there. He kind of did have a long jump to make that first year, which it was looking like he was coming along well. But now you have the injuries kicking in, which halts your progression even more. And this team is coming together quick. The reality of the situation here, Hunter, as much as I don't want it to be, is that if Anthony Richardson does not have an above average year in terms of what we expect, it's only a matter of time before the Colts have to start at least thinking about making tough decisions, because the window for this team is starting to somewhat open and you can see it. But if Anthony Richardson isn't going to match that talent that the rest of this roster is building to, all of a sudden you're going to have to start looking elsewhere for a quarterback. And let me be clear, I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I always just like to stay ahead of the curve. And again, we're staying ahead of curve. And the narrative is that Anthony Richardson is kind of all the pressure's on his shoulders. There's really no two ways about it because of how quickly the Colts have kind of put this back together.
I want to touch on a point that you made there about the expectations for Anthony Richardson, how he's supposed to come into the league. I think a lot of people knew he was developmental, but a lot of people were like, oh, well, he should just be a stud right away. And it's kind of funny because I know that a lot of people talk about Bryce Young, and I'm not trying to compare the two like 1A, 1B type of players, or apples to apples. They're really apples to oranges in terms of their college career, where they're polished, where they played. Anthony Richardson still played in the SEC, but Bryce Young was playing for Alabama, playing in the college football playoffs. Anthony Richardson wasn't doing that. So I guess my thing is, it almost feels like because what the Colts did last year, the expectations for Anthony Richardson are higher than they are for Bryce Young, which in my mind is kind of crazy because Bryce Young is the far more polished prospect. And I understand we're expecting jumps and even leaps from both of these players this year, but I just feel like there's more pressure on Anthony Richardson than there is on Bryce Young because, Bryce Young is in a bad situation. Yes, he was. Bryce Young did not have weapons. Yes, he did not. But And I would still argue that the Colts are a better situation right now at this time. But it just feels like coming into the league, Anthony Richardson was far more raw. And it's like, now you have to perform. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, he has to perform, but it's like not as much pressure's on the number one pick. I don't know. I'm not trying to compare. I'm not trying to say, well, he'll be better than this guy or this guy. But, like, I'm just trying to make it known, like, it feels like there's so much riding on Anthony Richardson this year when there really shouldn't be. He's basically a rookie.
No, that's the problem with these situations where, and again, it's a good problem to have, right? Like, it's a good problem that the rosters come along much quicker than you expected. But now, on the other hand, situations like this do come up where perhaps the most important guy to the plan, his development might be hinged because of this now. So, but again, I do have the utmost faith that Shane Steichen is going to be able to turn Anthony Richardson into a very productive pro, that we will see big leaps this year unless the injury bug continues. I think the way I'm looking at it at this point is like, if the injury bug comes back, truthfully, I'm trying to think of an analogy here, but to say it as simply as possible, there's nothing left for certain. Like, even after this year, Anthony Richardson's job could be in danger if he has another year of just missing a bunch of games and the Colts have another good year close to the playoffs or going to the playoffs with Flacco. Now, again, these are all hypotheticals. The bottom line is, if he deals with another injury-riddled season, there is going to be a lot more questions than answers. And I know it's the cliche, but for the Colts specifically, it's really the big thing. Can Anthony Richardson stay healthy, or does he not stay healthy? Because if he stays healthy, I have plenty of faith we're going to see a lot of big leaps this year, especially because of the big leap we already saw from the one-off season of coming from college to the NFL. So it's just being able to stay healthy and having that medical staff be on top of their game.
And also, last thing before we move into the next AFC South team is, I also feel like there's pressure because you have been playing the quarterback carousel game since Andrew Luck has left. So it's kind of like they brought in guys, they haven't been the guys, but they haven't really taken a swing on a quarterback like they have with, they had Matt Ryan, but Matt Ryan was a shell of Matt Ryan, and that O-line didn't help him. And
I almost forgot about that. It was so forgettable, actually.
Yeah, same. Sam Ellinger, Carson Wentz. Like, it's been a nightmare for Colts fans. So there is hope here with Anthony Richardson. I also do think that's why there's a little bit of pressure. Obviously the Panthers really haven't had a quarterback since Cam, but at the end of the day, it's not the same situation. So unless you have any other thoughts, are we ready to move into our next team?
I'm ready to move into the next squad.
All right, let's move in to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, our narrative for the year for them is this coaching staff on the hot seat, okay? I will say this. Based on the moves the Jacksonville Jaguars have made this offseason in terms of, some guys they have extended and everything like that, it seems like what Shad Khan has been saying, that you cannot live and die by free agency, that you need to develop and extend your homegrown talent through the draft. It seems like that was something that they did a lot. They lived and died by free agency, and it seems like they have, at least this year, started to take steps in the other direction. But where we come into the issue is, if we look at the Jaguars, right, last year, I think it was very hopeful that the Jacksonville Jaguars would be the 1 seed. That was my narrative going into last year, right? So I think when we look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they were 9-8 2 years ago, and then they were 9-8 again. But it kind of felt like this team really should have been much better last year than it was. And I think something you can point to is the play calling. I think the offense was a little weird with Press Taylor calling the plays, and we saw Calvin Ridley not necessarily be everything that they wanted him to be. So they go out, they get Gabe Davis, they go out, and they draft Brian Thomas Jr., and now you have a much more, in my opinion, loaded offense. I think it is a little muddy in terms of who's going to be the number one starting receiver. But let's not forget, they also have Evan Ingram, who's one of the best tight ends in football. And when you look at their O-line, it's not horrible. And they went out and got Mitch Morse once the Bills released them to kind of solidify that center position. You know, they extended Josh Allen. Yeah. They extended Josh Allen. You know, Trayvon Walker is, you know, hopefully going to be that guy that everyone hopes that he can be this year. They extended Tyson Campbell. Like, they, I think, have a pretty good core in place. But I don't want to equate this situation to the Falcons. But if they have another 9-8 year, it kind of feels like the Falcons' 3 consecutive finishes of 7-10.
No, it does. And, you know, to touch on everything you were saying at first, like, I think the big thing about the Jags that does really start to put this coaching staff on the hot seat, you know, like you're saying, is look, this team now is coming with a much more long-term plan, like you said. And what they said to everybody this year is, you know, they said it not directly, but they did, if you're paying attention, they basically said, okay, look, you know, we need to really shore up this interior D line so that Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker can just feast, right? So we're going to take shots on Mason Smith, and then we're also going to take a shot on Jordan Jefferson here. They also said, okay, we really need DB help, right? Like, we really got to get our DB room in check. So we're going to take Jerry Jones, and we're going to take Deontay Prince. And then they said, well, as we know, obviously, we need a number one wide receiver. We need a receiver who's not going to be dropping passes. That's been our literally Achilles heel for the last 2 or 3 years. We're getting Brian Thomas Jr. with super high upside, right? We're going to get another offensive lineman, Javon Foster. We're going to shore up this line. We're going to give Trevor Lawrence the help he needs. And, you know, and then again, you know, we in free agency, right? Like, they also made a fair amount of moves. Like you already meant Gabe Davis, Eric Armstead, which truthfully might have been a bit of an overpay, but I get it. They have connection.
You give really good players like amazing money. And I think that move will actually be one of the moves where you overpay a guy and it actually does move the needle for your team.
No, and I want to say to that point, Hunter, I think what I was going to say next is, too, on top of that, is the reason I think, like you're saying, the overpay in this case is okay. Like we were just saying, look, you're the Jaguars. You're saying we need to shore up this interior for the development of our edges, more so Trayvon. I mean, Josh Allen's already one of the best edges in the league. But now you add a veteran in to help these youngins, Mason Smith, Jordan Jefferson. All of a sudden, when Eric Armstead's out the door in a couple years, he's getting older, whatever, due to retirement, not being, you know, not renewing that contract. All of a sudden, we got a real experienced, really good veteran in the building helping out our guys that we just literally focused the draft on. So the Jaguars have a plan. They have a vision. Also, how can I forget the Darnell Savage is their slot corner? Like, the Jaguars have done a lot of things that really do make this team feel like a pretty new look Jaguars in a sense, right? I mean, realistically, this is a pretty new. If we could take a myriad of teams that are really like new look teams, right, minus like Trevor Lawrence, like, yeah, the Jags are a pretty new look roster. So that, Mac Jones, the backup, not that it's that important, but there's a lot of new pieces in place is what I'm trying to get at. And the bottom line is, if with all these new pieces and this new identity and this new long-term approach to getting the trenches set for Trevor Lawrence's dominance and a long-term vision, if the coaching staff can't start to put together the winning recipe now, well, tell me, Hunter, I mean, what are the direction does Saad Khan have to go in decides to find a new staff? Because I like to always bring it up too. You know, look, we'll always respect him as NFL fans. Doug Peterson, he's hit the pinnacle. He is coached to the pinnacle, and nobody can ever take that away from him. But, you know, in life, and especially in the NFL, it's not about what you've done for me. It's what you're doing now. Let Bill Belichick be the greatest example ever. So, and we already seen him get fired by the most active GM in the league, who happens to always see things 2 or 3 years before that they happen, in Howie Roseman. So could we be seeing a repeat situation here in Jacksonville? As much as you and me are Dougie P. Truthers, and, you know, we joke around and you know, we want that staff to be part of the Jags because we like Doug Peterson. Realistically, though, if it's another underwhelming bad season, really, what other direction do the Jags have to go? Because you're not getting rid of Trevor Lawrence. You're not cutting a bunch of guys you just signed. The money's pretty tied up for the most part in a few years down the road anyway. So the coaching staff's really the only place you can go from here if things don't take a jump this season.
You know, I'm very interested to see what their offense looks like this year. Like, I would like to see a lot more vertical downfield play schemed up on offense, because that has Trevor Lawrence has had a history of being pretty successful with that. And I don't think they were doing it a ton last year. I really think in terms of, is the coaching staff on the hot seat? They just brought in Ryan Nielsen, right, to be their defensive coordinator. I think Doug Peterson needs to take back play calling, because this is a common theme I notice with, because they fired their defensive coordinator, right? Am I wrong?
You know, let me do. I'm almost positive they did. Hold
on. Let me see. Yes, a day after the loss to Tennessee Titans, they fired defensive coordinator Mike Caldwell and his staff. Okay, that was January 9th, 2024. So I will say this. Something that I have noticed as a common theme with coaches on the hot seat. When things don't go well, first, the coordinators go. Offensive, defense, whatever you're lacking, that goes. If you don't get the fix right, and if your team doesn't get the fix right at coordinator, and the team doesn't perform better than the previous year, if the seat ain't warm, it's scorching hot, right? Like, it's scorching hot. Like, I think Doug Peterson will get it figured out, because I think if things are not going well on offense, that Doug Peterson will take play calling from Press Taylor if they don't start the season like that. And then I think you have a lot more ownership of what goes on. I just think, like you were saying, the Jaguars are in a position where if it doesn't work, where do you pivot to, right? And I'm not going to lie, like, I have been a Jaguars hype beast for the last couple of years. I really like what T-Law's done. The number one seed narrative might come back this year, even though it's not going to happen.
Real veterans remember the seed truthers.
Bro, I mean, they almost had it, and then they fell apart.
They had us in the first half, bro. They sold us.
It's just, I guess my thing is, I like the direction that the Jaguars are heading in terms of, it feels like they're making a little bit more educated decisions in how they build their roster, how they draft, how they sign players. With that being said, if they have another 9-8 season, I don't know what you're accomplishing. I don't know what else you could do to be better outside of all your draft picks hitting.
Well, and you know what? I just want to close out with this, because this is the truth here at this point, Hunter, and this is what I think Jags fans need to reckon with, or what's the word here? Not reckon with. I'm blanking. You guys get what I'm saying. What needs to be realized is that this roster. Let me, and I hate to do this, I really do, but I'm going to give you an example. Okay. Let's just little universe swap. Let's take Andy Reid over, and let's also take Steve Spagnuolo over and bring them to the Jaguars. Do you think that we're not seeing at least a 3 or 4 win increase on that win total with this current roster?
I think so.
I think so. Well, so that's where the pressure comes in. Is that this roster is not some I will say this bad roster. Like, all in all, when you look at the talent on this roster, you're saying to yourself, like, this is a 10-11 win team, should be bare minimum. You got to get at least to that benchmark.
I think those wins are going to come from, like, the boost from the defense and the play calling. Like, I think it's going to mainly be on the defense. And I think Andy Reid is a better play caller than Doug Peterson. I'm not trying to argue that, but I think if Peterson is calling the plays, I don't think the jump on offense is as drastic if you're bringing Andy Reid to replace Press Taylor.
No, I'll give you that, though. If they give the keys back to Doug P, which should have never been taken away in the first place. I don't know what
they're doing.
I'm pretty sure Doug gave them away himself. I don't know what he's doing with that one. So yeah, they need to get that back together. But that's really the narrative this year, Hunter. Is Doug Peterson and his staff the guys, or are we going to see a whole new staff in Jacksonville next year?
Moving in to our last team in the AFC South, we have the Tennessee Titans. Similar to the Colts, we need to see, is Will Levis the real deal? And now, I think he could be. I think with Brian Callahan at the helm, I've come around on the hiring, I feel like. And, you bring in Calvin Ridley for a good amount of money. You bring in Tyler Boyd. You pay Tony Pollard. You go out and draft J.C. Latham, and you now have really like 3 formidable O-linemen. Like, we hope Peter Skoronski can take the step. J.C. Latham could be a dog. You have Lloyd Cushenberry at center. So you have more. Peter Skoronski and Latham are still question marks, but they're like exclamation point question marks. Like they should be good. So you have like 3 of the 5 figured out, which is
they
not
should
bad.
At least be average NFL linemen. Like that's their floor, hopefully.
That's okay. I do have a little bit of issue with the team building. I do. I still do. I think corner being one of the most volatile positions in the league, you trade for L'Jarius Sneed, you pay him, you bring in Calvin Ridley, you pay him. If Will Levis isn't the guy, I mean, like, D-Hop's probably here one more, like, this year, and then he's gone. Tyler Boyd's a little bit older, so it's like, it almost feels like, and I understand this, like, let's say you're strictly trying to win a Super Bowl on the Will Levis rookie contract window. Well, then you've set your team up for success because Will Levis, second-round pick, don't have a fifth-year option on him, right? And you should have the line on the offense. You should have the pass catchers. But like, I'm also interested to see how the defense shakes out, going from a Mike Vrabel to a Brian Callahan. I think the O-line will be fine because they brought in Bill Callahan as well, who's known for having O-line. But I think, going back to our narrative, I'm just saying, like, overall, this year is all about finding out if Will Levis can be their franchise quarterback. And I think they've done everything needed in order to put him in a position to succeed. But I also feel like you're just kind of setting yourself up for, like, okay, let's say he plays well this year, Dobbs, okay? Like, I'm not going to say, well, let's say like a little above average, right? And then he plays average next year. Well, you either got to extend him, and these other guys are getting a little bit older. Like, don't forget, like, Calvin Ridley's, like, I believe 29. Like, he's up there. Tony Pollard wasn't really productive last year. So it's kind of like you're in a very, like, tight window, it feels like. So do you think with the current situation that Will Levis could be the guy for them? Because I just want to make one point. Show me one ripped quarterback that's been really good.
That is actually hilarious. Okay. It's food for thought. No, I think, look, realistically, you know, when you take the tape from last year, it is definitely like the definition of like high and low, right? Like there's some stuff on there where you're like, oh my God, like he's like years ahead of where he should be in that department. But then there's other areas where you're like, all right, you know, like this is the type of stuff that we expected, right? Like the growth that needs to happen and it's to be expected, right? But I'm going to admit, he gave me a lot more of the positive flashes than the negative ones, especially from what I expected coming in this rookie year. So as of right now, I think if you're the Titans, you do feel damn good about having Will Levis in the building. Like he really could actually be your guy long term, which is awesome, right? But now to your point about kind of the direction with the roster building and everything, look, you know, everything you said is spot on. And that's actually exactly what I was going to say. Like, if we're only worried right now about like staying competitive for the next like 2 or 3 years and like having a surefire, like hopefully, and that's the problem. That's really what makes it kind of makes this such a tough evaluation from our perspective is like, as much as that they did have a huge improvement this off season, you're playing in the AFC. You're playing in a division of teams that have already shown that they are.
It's going to be a bloodbath this year.
It's a bloodbath. Like, even with the roster like this, with the jump they made, they really are not even far from guaranteed a playoff spot, especially with the youth and experience of the O-line. Like we were talking about, if that O-line doesn't live up to or make the jumps that we expect them to, all of a sudden, even Will Levis's life is much different than it could be if they make that jump. There's a lot of hypotheticals in place. And then over to the defense, right? Like the biggest thing is it's going to be very interesting to see how his defense changes this year. You know, you feel definitely very good about some personnel, but then there's other things in this defense where it's like, you know, I still feel like, you know what I mean? Namely Kenneth Murray starting. All right, no, unnecessary shot. You know, when we go across, when you go across this depth chart, it's just the bottom line is this team is still not a championship contender. this what makes it so tricky though. It's like they're headed for sure in the right direction, but in the AFC right now, all the teams that have loaded rosters and you built more of a short-term window, that's what's so tricky about it. Is it's like, Hunter, if they don't make some absolute Tennessee Music City magic happen over the next 2 or 3 years, where is the roster going to be? Because to your point, okay, best case scenario, we have a really, really good O-line and a really good quarterback. But outside of that, like, right, okay, I mean, the bottom line is just a lot of their good players are getting old now. Let's just like the simple, because I don't want to like sell them short like they don't have good young guys on the roster, right? Like they certainly do, and they still have guys that are like that could enter into their prime, that could. But that's the key word. I don't think you really go through this roster again besides the O-line. Maybe end Tajay Spears. Okay, I got to give Tajay a shout. But where you're looking at them and you're saying, yeah, those guys are going to be coming into their own in the next few years. I just feel like there's really not a lot of those guys on the Titans roster, and that's kind of what makes this evaluation so tough for them.
Tony Pollard, 27, Tyler Boyd, 29, Calvin Ridley, 29, D-Hop, 32. So it's like your top 3 receivers are 30. They're 30 years old. Like, they definitely still have stuff left in the tank, but we know how fast players can fall off a cliff. And Tony Pollard, I know why they brought him. I can guess why they brought him in. One of the best pass blocking backs in the league. But like you said, Dobbs, it's hard. Like, it's really hard to see like these certain players like that are gonna fill their spots. Like Treylon Burks, I don't think anyone's counting on him at this point.
He's on the roster bubble, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure right now, if the last report I read about a week ago is correct, he's not even like a surefire to make the roster at this point, which is insane. But like,
I mean, I like Tajay Spears, and the rookie Jaquan Jackson could be an interesting play. But I mean, I also question, this is not Will Levis related. This is more like of an organization thing. Okay, they fired Vrabel, and I'm not trying to get on the firing Vrabel, Brian Callahan. I understand if you want to go an offensive route. I get it. I understand. They fire Vrabel, who a lot of people, and he's jobless right now, so I don't know how the league views him, but a lot of people consider to be one of the best coaches in the NFL, okay? I'm more talking about the GM in this situation. T'Vondre Sweat had issues in college, gets a DUI like a week before the draft, and then they take him in the second round. Then there were some issues with practicing and training camp, and he goes, I don't know, ask the coach. And maybe they overblew it, but like, it just feels like they just took the guy. Like, they didn't care about any of the character stuff, and I'm not a GM. I'm not interviewing this guy. I'm not, getting down to the nitty-gritty with him. And I'm not trying to judge. Like, maybe hopefully he turns it around. And it has nothing to do with Sweat and more about the fact of, like, the GM's decision-making in a year could look like very, very questionable if the Titans are bad. If they're bad, their players are old, they took a guy who had character concerns, and you fired what most would consider one of the better head coaches in the league.
No, and you know what? Now that you're saying all that, Hunter, I haven't even we've thought about it, but I haven't really like put it into an exact thought like this. Like, do you think that it's safe to say at this point the Titans are just the biggest question mark in the entire league?
So that's funny because I will agree with you. I do think they have the potential to be, and I'm not as good because I don't think Will Levis is CJ Stroud, but could they be this year's Texans? Like, they could be a team that is just
They have the
really
polarity.
That's
like,
what
they
I'm
can
saying.
either
Like,
be a bottom feeder or a playoff team. And it's kind of like
all the teams we've done so far, Dobbs, and we've done, four other divisions. They're the team that I'm most confused about. I don't like. They have all the talent in the world to be a good team, right? Like, they have enough on offense and defense to be a good team. I just need to see it on paper, or I need to see it on, I'm looking at it on paper. I need to see it on the field to really know. And I'm not trying to hate on the Titans. I really am not. I just want to put it out there that's like, this is a very optimistic view of the Titans of what they could be, bringing in these older players to compete. And maybe their plan is, we don't care if we're going to win the Super Bowl in the next 2-3 years. We want to know if Will Levis is the guy. And you've done pretty much everything you needed to do in order to ensure that, outside of maybe getting a new right guard and right tackle. But you can't fix everything in one offseason. You went out and got one of the best corners in the game. You go get Calvin Ridley, and you have now 3 good receivers like Joe Burrow had in Cincinnati when Brian Callahan was there to develop their quarterback. So, with that being said, the Titans have a very promising year ahead of them. But at the same time, it could be a year that after this year, if they don't perform, you look back and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have made that move. Maybe we jumped the gun a little bit fast on this one.
And you know what? And to that point, I think it's almost, again, you have to respect it. You respect the aggression to go build a competitive team, but that's when you have to temper expectations with reality and kind of play like the long game. And that's one thing that we can agree on is, well, there's no doubt, all the best GMs in the league that retain their jobs long term, they understand that it's a game of getting your window in the right spot and making sure that what you do aligns to have your window come up in the right spot. And as long as you and the ownership group are in good, clear communication about how that window is going to open, and you're doing the things every offseason you have to do to prop that window open a little bit more, that's really all your job should be. I think nowadays, unfortunately, too many GMs, I don't blame them, Hunter. I think the problem is all the pressure of social media, every second of every fucking day is documented. There's no downtime. There's no, right? Everybody wants an answer and a solution constantly. So it's never been tougher to have a job where your job is to build the long-term structure of the team, but everybody wants long-term results in a short-term period. Right. And it just is unrealistic. So is this going to be another case of a GM just doing the most, literally? And I'm not, again, not knocking it, doing the most in terms of like they are trying to build a winning team. Yeah. But did you build a winning team at the right window? And I think that's kind of the final thoughts that we should leave Titans fans with. Because again, I'm not saying you didn't. I'm not saying you did or didn't. We're going to find out this year. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, that would be my overall consensus on the Titans. Well, this has been team previews for every team in the AFC South. If you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe. Leave a like. Let us know in the comments who you think is going to win the AFC South. If you haven't already, go check out our other team previews for the NFC and AFC North, and then the AFC and NFC East. After this, you will see the NFC South and the AFC and NFC West. They'll be coming out after this. So thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great rest of your night.